debates on the relevance of archaeology. To pleasure to have you with us, Robin. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Ursula. Thanks so much, Ursula, and Lut, of course, for hosting not only this lecture, but the wonderful workshop that we just finished about 3/4 of an hour ago, I think. So forgive me if I fall asleep halfway through the lecture, but it's been a joy being here amongst you. And I really feel like I'm amongst friends. Certainly, I don't know about online. It's probably all my enemies online, but certainly in the room, there are only friends, I think. So it's great to see you all here, and thank you for your resilience in doing just one last hour together with me. Thanks so much. What I want to give you today is something of a personal story, actually. So I don't want it to be too heavy. Well, it is academic, but it's also really involves the personal story about my professional development, particularly in museum and heritage studies. I have no time tonight to talk about my other passion, which is Central Mediterranean prehistory. But I really want to talk through that personal story through a series of case studies in public archaeology and in global archaeology. So I combine these two narratives really at the same time. And of course, I've been learning over the last days as well. So it's also an expression of what I'm always learning about heritage, of course, but your city's symbol has had real resonance with me over these few days. So thank you to my hosts as well for educating me about your culture and the tensions that come with it as well occasionally. So I told you I'd start with a personal story. This is where I grew up, at least for the first 10 years of my life. It's a place called, excuse me. Maybe I deleted where I grew up. There we are. From my memory and my experience. I had a good childhood. It's on my screen. Oh, I see. Is it showing? Sorry, it's all going wrong because I've touched something that I shouldn't have touched. Ursula to the rescue, hopefully. I did want to show you where I was going to, where I grew up. So I think I accidentally pressed something in the process, but I promise never to press another button in my life. But anyway, perhaps as we're hopefully rescuing my disaster. Really, I wanted to tell you with reference to the first 10 years of my life that I grew up very much with a romantic view of the past. In a sense, the past was a place to escape to. It wasn't really a past of the present day at all. It was a place where my brother and I used to play in. The past was a place to collect food for our guinea pigs, our pet animals. It was a place to imagine that we were Tarzan swinging across the moat of an ancient Norman castle. So really from that, it was a natural progression for me to study archaeology. Actually, look at this team coming to the save me. This is the whole technical team. Right. So anyway, so it was a natural progression for me to study archaeology at university. But even though my parents were very supportive, they always have been, some of my friends of my parents were much less supportive. So they said, firstly, why are you studying archaeology? I said, because it's interesting, of course. But I didn't say, of course, because I was more polite then than I was today. So they asked me, why do you study archaeology? That's a strange subject. Why are you doing that? But even more, what they went on to ask me, or they said to me, they didn't even ask me, they said, you're a perpetual student. And I thought, oh my gosh, how do I answer that? You know, being accused of being a perpetual student. And the implication there was, I was taking their taxpayers' money to fund my entertainment. So all these stories were going on here in this wonderful landscape and place. Well, maybe I just press one button from now on. So they said, I'm a perpetual student, and why should we fund your lifestyle? Okay, you're having fun. You're imagining you're in that castle. This is where I grew up, just in a house down here below the castle. So this is a Norman castle, this place called Bramber in the south of England. And this is a picture by Alan Sorrell, which really coloured my imagination of archaeology. Okay, it's raining and there's no Mediterranean sun, so I escaped that bit of the imagination. But that coloured my imagination vividly, and I've spent part of my career trying to recreate the past in that vividness, not only visually, but also through the senses. But as I say, my brother and I played in this space and we were Tarzan and down there and so on. So it was a place of escapism, but for my parents, it was a place of justify yourself. Why are you doing this? Why aren't you paying money? Why aren't you contributing to society? Why aren't you working in a bank? That's what the message was. And I've spent my life trying to answer that accusation. And it worries, I'm still there, but it pushed me into learning and arguing about public archaeology. Please, yes. And through that process of worrying about those justify myself, I worried through in writing and expressed those concerns through a series of books that have been mentioned. So it really started with this book on the left, which is about all heritage debates all around the world, through to public archaeology, which I did in collaboration with Carol McDavid and John Carman, and then an edited volume on museums and archaeology. And it was really, as I say, that criticism stayed me. And so in addition to really working on the central Mediterranean prehistory, which was pure escapism, pure pleasure, I really felt that I had to answer those accusations through my writing and through presentations as to the significance of archaeology, not just to the friends of my parents, but to a diversity of publics around the world. Why does archaeology matter, including through museums? So that's been very much part of my mission. My first case study, and part of where I started my mission, was when I moved to my first lectureship at the University of East Anglia. And I was working in a world art studies department, so not just as an archaeologist. And I taught or I was encouraged to talk about heritage, to teach archaeological heritage, in addition to my pure archaeology, with an emphasis on debates. And the key debates in those days, and I guess they still are to a certain extent, are who owns the past and who controls the past, which are not quite the same things necessarily. Or to whom does the past belong? We can keep on rewriting that question in many different words, but essentially it's about control. At that time, when I was writing about these heritage debates and in my new lectureship, this prehistoric site was discovered in 1999 off the coast of Norfolk, that's in east of England. It's been given the name Seahenge, and it's an old, a prehistoric monument built out of oak wood. This is an upside down tree trunk, so the tree goes that way, the roots go that way. It's an amazing monument and wooden posts around it. It was built around 2000 years BCE. It is, and what I want to talk about first is that it's a classic example of poor communication between archaeologists and the public, or various publics, as I discovered, partly at my cost, actually. So here's the beginning of where it went wrong. The site was discovered, the local press reported the discovery, and the Druids came to reappropriate the site. The Druids were people like this guy, who also plays a didgeridoo and smokes a lot of interesting substances, I discovered. But, you know, he was their leader, and why not? I'm sure the leader of the monument smoked a lot of it. Well, maybe, yeah. Anyway, we won't get into speculation. We're scientists, aren't we, today? So anyway, the Druids came and they did rituals and they wanted to save Seahenge from the archaeologists. because the archaeologists announced that they were going to dig out the site. They were going to save the site themselves from the Druids. So there was this massive battle, and this is an archaeologist, this is a Druid, and the key participants in this story were actually members of the press, and particularly this local newspapers. You barely have newspapers these days, but in those olden days, we read paper newspapers. And there was a journalist working for the Eastern Daily Press, and he just published week after week this articles stirring trouble, getting the Druids to do new interviews, to achieve new... So the Druids eventually went to court because English Heritage, the heritage organisation in England at the moment, basically wanted to dig out the site. The Druids wanted to save the site in situ. However, what I discovered to my... I don't know if it was a mistake or not. I organised a conference because I think a conference, we can be sensible, we can talk together. So I invited everyone who was anyone in this debate to come to my university. So 100 people came, including the police, including a representative of English Heritage. The head of English Heritage refused because I think they were too terrified to come, so he sent his deputy. The local residents came because they were angry, because their village had been overtaken by Druids and others and archaeologists. The Bird Protection Society came because they really hated people of any kind, okay? They just wanted those birds to be safe. And there were local tour guides because by this stage they'd done boat trips up the coast. They used to do boat trips to look at the wildlife. They decided this was a much better target for their boat trips. So they wanted to make money out of the site, to sell tours for tourists. So anyway, they all came to my place and they argued. Wow, we had Peter Rucko host the conference, who was really generous, and but anyway, but he didn't even help because they just wanted to argue. We had to evict one of the Druids, him, because he was just quite aggressive. But actually, seriously, the winners on that conference were the local residents, and this has been another lesson for my life. The local residents said the most sensible things. They said, actually, we belong here, so give us a say, tell us, let us say, tell you. Let us have a voice even. They had no voice. Let us have a voice. And there was this woman, I remember, who stood up. She wasn't a public speaker or anything. She'd prepared her paper written like me, and she was powerful, her voice, on saying, our voice comes first. You lot can do your things, but let us have a voice. Because they didn't think about them, the local residents. So in the end, you can imagine the story at the court. The High Court ruled on behalf of the authorities. So English Heritage, the Druids lost. And the site was excavated, if you call it excavation. I call it extraction because it reminds me of going to the dentist. So if you can imagine, they got a digger to sort of help the process. There's the archaeologists getting very muddy. And they pulled out each and every one of these wooden pieces of the monument. Remember, I grew up in that castle. I'm a romantic. So for me, this was painful. And it was a difficulty as an archaeologist because I was meant to be an archaeologist supporting this. But as a romantic, I didn't actually. And I worried about all of those other those other protagonists in the story, those stakeholders. So for me, actually, I found it a bit of a desecration of a really special site that I'd visited. 100 meters away, a few years later, or perhaps a year later, archaeologists and local people discovered another site. It was very, very similar, another wooden circle on the edge of the sea. Do you know the end of the story now? It was completely the opposite. They left the site there. The authorities left the site there. What they did, and I agree with this process, they left the site to erode with the sea, but they also monitored the site systematically, which is good practice in terms of heritage management. They monitored the site, they recorded as much as they could, but they're letting it go. They're letting it go. And I think they learnt their lessons. I last saw Seahenge a couple of years ago in the British Museum in 2022 in an exhibition actually about Stonehenge, but they thought they'd bring in this wooden variant to the exhibition. You remember, I'm a romantic. I was sad, actually, you know. It didn't seem right. There was only part of the monument because the local museum, it's their star exhibit, so they wouldn't let go of the tree, the main tree. But just these objects, it just didn't work. There were the stars of the exhibition as well were artifacts. Some amazing polished stone axes, which sounds boring to you perhaps, but they were amazing objects, just displayed in really aesthetic ways. I just felt it was like dead. This monument had died in the museum, and I'm passionate about museums. I believe in museums, but I feel in this case they were displaying dead objects that had for no great gain. As I say, the stars of the objects were the artifacts, like the Nebra sky disk, which I don't know if you know, it's a Bronze Age artifact. It's an amazing object. It shows this, potentially sort of astronomical features. So that for me wasn't a good story, the Seahenge one. It wasn't a good ending, apart from this Seahenge 2, if you like. Okay, I move on with my story. I move on with my life history now. So I eventually moved to Durham. I almost lost my identity as an archaeologist. So in writing about Seahenge, I wrote about they archaeologists, and not me an archaeologist, but the other. Because I was in an art history department, I was close to anthropologists, to museum people. So I was kind of, and I really loved that loss of my disciplinary identity. But eventually time came to move. And I decided actively to move to an archaeology department, quite a hardcore one, at Durham University in the north of England. And I'm very sorry if my wife's watching online for taking you to the north of England, because she was cold for the first 5 years of her life. She's Italian, so she was cold and unhappy. So sorry, Valentina. But anyway, we went there and we survived. But anyway, on that move to Durham, I was appointed as the director of a master's program in museum and artifact studies. But I also continued to work on heritage. I also became an advisor to the National Trust. The National Trust is not only a big landowner in the UK, an enormous landowner, but they're a heritage agency and a charity that cares for not only historic houses, but historic landscapes that contain a lot of archaeology. So I became an archaeological advisor to them, and it was a real privilege to work with these amazing staff from the National Trust. I don't think I ever taught them anything. They taught me so much. But in 2013, they asked me to undertake some research, probably because they knew they weren't getting any other good stuff out of me. So they asked me to do some research for them. They wanted me to ask a key question that perhaps not many people ask. They asked me to research what makes people go wow when they visit an archaeological place out in the landscape. Now, I don't know the translation of wow in Turkish. Do you say wow? Oha. Waha. Waha. That's brilliant. No, he's got it wrong, is he? Is that right? Was that rude? That's rude. Oh, he's taught me my first rude word in Turkish. Okay, I never say it again. It's like that button. I'm never pressing that button, and I'm never saying that W word again. Anyway, somewhere in all of your languages, there is a wow. There's an emotional response to something when you're hit by the past, when you experience the past for the first time. I would define it as aesthetic, but aesthetic meaning not just visual, but emotional, full-bodied. There's an impact of the past on you when you experience the past, particularly perhaps out in the landscape, but actually also in museums. So they asked me, the National Trust, to research what happens when people, not you, when visitors say wow, when they encounter the past. So this evolved into a project not only about the wows of archaeology, as we called it, um, but also more broadly how to present the past to the public and to various publics. So we focused on two sites in in the north of England. I don't know if you know this place. It's a World Heritage Site. It was built by those rotten Romans. It's called Hadrian's Wall. Okay, so it goes from one side of the north of England to the other side of north of England. And these are and then there's fortresses built along the Roman wall. And this is one of the Roman fortresses, not just that, but a bigger space behind. It's called Halstead's Roman Fort. Here on the right is a much less known site, and it's in Yorkshire, and it's called Hardcastle Crags. And this place has not only a mill, so it's industrial heritage, but it has archaeology in the woodlands, like charcoal burning. So it's a very magical place, and you can walk across the stepping stones and fall in sometimes as well with your children. So this was the project then. The National Trust asked us to read, first of all, about their programme, which was all about encouraging visitors to get outside, get outdoors, and get closer to nature, because they wanted people to feel the health benefits of getting closer to nature, but they felt that archaeology could help in that process. More broadly, it was part of this panel that I was part of on historic environment and archaeology. And I collaborated with someone called Nicole Beale, and I really want to acknowledge her energy that she put into this project to make it happen. So the first phase of the project was back in 2013. And we've been talking a bit about research methods in our workshop over the last few days. So these are the methods we use with the visitors. This is a heritage piece of research, a visitor studies kind of research. So we asked the staff of the National Trust helped us with this research as well, and I involved master's students to work on the research. So we undertook structured interviews with both the staff of the National Trust and volunteers of the National Trust, because they live every day with the archaeology. So it's a bit like your new project that you're going to work on. We did observations of the staff, of volunteers, but also of visitors. But we embedded our students as members of staff within the sites, and they had a badge. So they were part of the property, and then those students observed visitors. The thing that we did, which was a bit new in those days, is we basically issued every visitor, well, not every visitor, but a lot of visitors with a digital camera. Now that seems like old technology these days because you use your smartphone, of course. But we bought a lot of digital cameras, and we gave every visitor a digital camera and said, please, take a photo of anything old that makes you go, wow. And they went crazy with those cameras. And then we interviewed them after they'd gone crazy with their cameras around the sites. And we did follow-up interviews. Finally, we did some textual research and e-research. So we looked at the visitor comments cards that the visitors had filled out when they'd finished their visits to the sites. And we looked at their comments online, on TripAdvisor and places like that to find out about their experiences. So these are the things that the visitors, well, actually, what the visitors said, they didn't make comments, but they raised questions. They raised doubts. In other words, they raised doubts about their academic knowledge, about what they were worried that they didn't know what archaeology was, actually. And that's a lesson for all archaeologists. Most people out there think it's still about dinosaurs, okay? So hard luck. That's just the way it is. They raised doubts and questions, particularly about archaeology, but about the past as well. So they find it fascinating, but they didn't know what the purpose of the old mill pond was. Who did it? Who made these things? These are basic questions that we forget to tell the public so often. Children, of course, only want to know where they went to the toilet. But anyway, and they ask that a lot, actually. It's true, they ask that a lot at Hadrian's walls. But they worry, you know, does that count as archaeology? Is it okay that I photographed the floor, the footpath? Is that okay? Yes, keep photographing the floor. I don't have a clue, but that's okay. How old is it? Well, we don't have a clue generally, do we? So why should they? So just a little bit more detail on those visitor photographs. These are the things they went around and photographed at Hadrian's Wall and Halstead. So at Hadrian's Wall, they went for the monumental Roman stuff. But, you know, why photograph that? I haven't got a clue, but it was nice. You know, thank you. And these are a bit more obvious, of course. But but you see, they're not just zooming in on the archaeology, they also want the landscape context there. And here they love the pattern of the walls, I think, and the plants growing out. It's not the way an archaeologist would photograph an archaeological site, if we call it an archaeological site even. And again here's the floor photographer. It's a great photo, actually. You see the colour difference. There used to be a wall there. And there's a dip there because the room used to be a dance hall, actually. The mill was converted. So you imagine all those stamping feet on the dance floor. And then there's this other floor, and I have no idea what that is or why it was photographed. Maybe a bit of a metal post or something. No idea. But it doesn't matter. They made them go, wow. So in more detail, looking at the visitors' photographs, a lot of visitors at Halstead's, the Roman fort, in other words, focused on symmetry and shapes in the landscape often, but not always. And they also compared the details to their lives, not about going to the toilet, but about living in the landscape, living out in the open, living in close communities together, you know, being people, foreigners from North Africa living in the north of England. So themes of daily life, preservation of the site, countryside. At Hardcastle Crags, that woodland place, if you remember, visitors were excited and curious in a different way. They couldn't figure out the difference between the natural and the archaeological features, the natural and the cultural. Theorists now allow us to not differentiate between the two. But in those days, the natural and the archaeology, they felt bad about not telling the difference. For me, you remember that romantic, I love overgrown ruins, you know, the more moss going on, yes, bring it on, but not the rain that makes the moss. So the themes there that came out were about discovery, interpretation, but just small details. I'm still not absolutely sure what that was to do with the mill pond, but it was significant for our visitors at least. Phase 2 of our project took place a few years later. We were invited to go back to Hardcastle Crags and get into even more detail, working in a similar way. So we did interviews, these so-called mythical semi-structured interviews, which basically have a conversation with people, with both volunteers and visitors. And we did these so-called grounded observations, which are basically being very nosy about visitors coming to the site. You know, is this archaeology? Is it just vegetation? Or is it just a nice place to sit down and, you know, have a sleep? And we analysed the data that came out of these interviews. And we created ultimately from that project these guidelines about how to discover archaeology outdoors in identifying the wows of archaeology for interpretation. So we wrote this document both for the National Trust, but also other, well, primarily for the National Trust, for all National Trust properties, to guide them into, you know, what makes people go wow. I don't think we answered that wows question, to be honest. I'm still not absolutely certain what makes people go wow. You know, but it's something about surprise, actually, being surprised by something that captures your imagination. But what we also realized in this process, as the National Trust does, is that there are different kinds of visitors. There are explorer families, for example. They're just out with the kids. They want the kids to run around, have fun, let off energy. It's not an archaeology lesson for the children, but they can pick it up at the same time. And then there's these sort of out and abouts, which are maybe older people who are in the car. They really need a wee and they need a cup of tea in England. So they go to a National Trust place and they want to find out a bit of history, but it's brief. It's a quick visit. They want a quick hit of some archaeology, some history. The understanding then is different visitors have different strategies, different needs from the past. They're not all the public, they're not all the visitors. And that's what we try to understand with what makes people go wow, really varies from what your intentions are for visiting somewhere. We also ended with a wonderful exhibition where we put on display those photographs that our visitors had photographed at Hardcastle Crags. And it was called a Woodland Archaeology exhibition, which we did in that old mill house. And we did banners as well. So it was very, very much visitor driven, this exhibition, but we got designers in and the visitors came for the opening. And it was just a great moment. We did social media and so on. It was very much a community event. And then we got more feedback from visitors to that exhibition. And they said from the exhibition that they were then more aware of archaeology. They'll look out for it, even in hidden where it's in the landscape. That they discovered there's more to that woodland landscape than just a beautiful valley. And that it's great to be reminded to zoom in on the human stories as well in the landscape. So that, I think, was our greatest moment, that exhibition, actually. Okay, so I move on again in time with my life story. I was in 2015. It's kind of like musical chairs in our department, and I was the only one left standing, and so I became head of my department. And it was a privilege to be head of department. But it was also a pleasure in many ways, and a pain. But the pleasure was really, well, a pleasure and the pain was gaining experience of managing people. But also the pleasure really was traveling the world to promote my department, my colleagues' work around the world, particularly in China, because we were trying to encourage Chinese students to come to our university. And we ended up partnering with the Palace Museum, which is the Forbidden City in Beijing. And I'm still very proud of that relationship that we maintain with them. So anyway, from 2018, just towards the end of my time as head of department, a colleague who was then a researcher in our department called Arwa Badran said, well, she's someone who doesn't take no for an answer. She's a Jordanian scholar and heritage consultant. And she just came to me one day and said, you must work with me. Okay, well, I'm a bit busy at the moment, but but no is not in her vocabulary. So I was telling our group of mentees today, you have to practice saying no occasionally, but no was not acceptable. So I started working with Arwa, and she said, and what you've got to do is apply for a grant as well. Thanks, Arwa, that's really great. I really wanted to do that. So she insisted that I work with her on a new project, which we developed together very much, word by word of the grant application and throughout the years that we've worked together. She wanted me to work on museum education in Jordan. And again, it's a life-changing experience for me, and I've loved it all the time I've worked with her and getting to know the people in Jordan, her colleagues, and many members of the local communities. This was a much more complex and ambitious project than that one that I did for the National Trust, which is a bit naive in a sense, but this one was complex and difficult. It was primarily on museum archaeology. It was, in a sense, very much comparable to the work Kristen's doing, Burçu's doing, and Uşılay as well. So it's a mixture of all of you sort of thrown into the Jordan context, really. there was a challenge that we were faced with in Jordan, and Arwa was very aware of it, that basically the younger generation in Jordan, I don't know if this is the case in here in Turkey or not, but they don't engage particularly well with heritage. They don't, you know, apart from perhaps the heritage of their families going back to their grandparents, but that's it. This archaeological heritage is much more nebulous, difficult for them to appreciate. And it was also, you know, there's the challenge that both in formal education and at sites and museums, Jordanian people, it's not on the curriculum, archaeology, or barely. And at museums as well. And they're really quite old-fashioned, many of them. I mean, I don't think they will forgive me for showing this old label, which basically says pottery pots. Now, that's a good one. I love it, but it doesn't, well, it gives you an information that you've got pottery there. But, you know, someone wrote it and there was a reason. But it's not great as a museum label, really. Not with the benefit of museum studies, at least. And there were these old colonial style, and the Brits actually opened this museum, so it was the British fault. So these rather old colonial style exhibitions in a number of museums in Jordan, particularly this one, which is the Citadel Museum in Amman. And what was the real problem for Arwa was that these museums were contributing only to the Jordanian tourist economy because visitors pay to visit them. They really did nothing for social development and local communities. There were many other challenges facing the Jordanian museum and heritage sector. Money, zero. You know, just enough to pay the staff salaries. Politics, plenty of it. I won't get into the details there. Legal legal difficulties of how to actually change anything at all. You know, red tape, as we call it in English. The national curriculum and the Ministry of Education textbooks, which really are quite fixed in their sense of when history begins and if prehistory exists and so on. Tensions between public museums, which are poorly funded, and private museums, which are funded by patronage and are much better professionally as a consequence. There were also perceptions of museums and heritage sites as tourist places or photo places. Romantic places, if you like, as well. But you see the backdrop of Amman there as well. I'm kind of, in some ways, reminded of my hotel view here. But of course, your city is much more elegant and peaceful and so on. There were problems there was no museum staff training. The archaeology collections are fantastic, but undervalued. And there was a problem in those days that foreign aid development partners were coming in, giving some money. And as you see, I was really shocked to see this particular label in one of the museum's displays where it was loud and clear who the donor was. What the objects on display was much less clear, but you knew where they got the money. Sadly, the money is no longer coming from there. So maybe it's a double-edged sword, really, this aid. So I don't say no aid from that source, but maybe less shouting about it. And then museum trips as well got closed down because there was a tragedy on a school bus, and the government said no more school trips to any museums. So I was entered into Jordan with a bit of a problem to help solve. And we actually made progress on all of those dimensions. Our main objective really was to do something for young people, to learn about this amazingly rich cultural and multicultural heritage. It wasn't just, and that was a political tension in its own way, how to tell a multicultural story in Jordan. I won't even get into the politics or the religion, but it was complex. But we wanted to start by asking museum people and heritage professionals what might work best in the Jordanian context. So the first time I went to the Amman Citadel Museum, I said, "What's it feel like to work here?" and they started crying. I was telling someone, I think Ursula, the other day, they started crying. And I thought, oh no, what have I said? I've got it wrong again. And they said, you're the first person to ask us, what's it feel like to work here? And we worked here for 10, 20 years. And we've sat here and we've smoked cigarettes and we've taken the money and that's it. So they needed to be asked. Secondly, there was a need and objective to train some of those staff, but using Jordanians to train each other, actually, not to us to just parachute in and say what's best. So we got the private museum people to work with the public museums, the National Museum, which is super well funded, to work with all of the museums as a hub. And of course, we had to work with the policymakers as well and the government people. So there was a fair bit of that kind of advocacy work as well. Our other objectives were to develop partnerships, sustainable partnerships, not between us so much, but between Jordanian colleagues to help them speak to each other across these many divides of the government-funded museums and the non-government funded museums, the government-funded museums and the National Museum. They didn't speak to each other. And here they are all smiling, you know, so it was great. And sharing best practice, but best practice in Jordan that was already existing, but they didn't know it was good. Well, some of them did, but they needed to share it. And there they are sharing. So we started this project, and I won't go through all the small print, but we did a needs assessment. We tried to assess, what do they need? They needed training. And we did lots of focus groups in Jordan, in the museums, asking them, how can we improve things? How can we make things better? So targeting national curriculum committees, for example, which we ended up doing, establishing Friends of Museum clubs, and so on. Lots of good ideas that we generated, or they generated. And we then identified good practice. Staff, the passion of the staff was critical. Collaboration between the museum leaders, getting involved in new education activities, involving the communities. Teachers are the key to all of this, speaking to teachers and involving university students who have the energy much more than us. So working with the energy. So the Jordan Museum, great, well funded. It's got a big Japanese loan, and it's really well funded museum, and great state of the art displays. So they were one of the places where we could go for good practice, and they did really good partnerships with schools as well, and the staff were welcoming. The Children's Museum, this is a private museum, and it has royal backing as well, from the Jordanian royal family, and this of course makes a difference. But the staff, they work on science and technology, they have a dedicated education team, and they do hands-on learning. And they shared that with the other museums during the project. And they even have a mobile museum van, which they take to rural parts of Jordan, which is great, a museum on wheels. Why not? SELA, this NGO, non-governmental organization, Jordanian-based, staffed by Jordanians, and they're not-for-profit, and they work with local communities, like at Tel Hizban here, where there is an ongoing US excavation project, but the local school teacher was invited to or maybe they just did, they wrote the labels to the site for visitors, which is really nice, I thought. And then SELA helps with the whole upskilling of the local community to do some of the restoration and conservation work. The universities as well. So the Hashemite University, Shadahi, who I collaborated with, got her architecture students to get involved in developing logos for different archaeological sites and museums, and involving local communities again with that creative work. And then we did a lot of training in Jordan of Jordanian colleagues, as you can see, training other Jordanian colleagues on good practice in the museum sector. From the National Museum breathing down the neck of one of our partners as well, but it was brilliant. And they went through lots of practices, sharing how to tell stories through collection, how to write object labels. You remember the pottery pots or the, so how to write good object labels and the importance of partnering with schools. And then eventually we did bring them to Durham. This is the cathedral in the city where I work. Oh, that's okay. And we got our Jordanian colleagues to teach Durham children, which is really nice. And the teachers actually commented on what the Jordanian teachers gave the children, which is just a closer, real empathy with the children, actually. A real, as if they're their children, their own children, and teaching them in that way. And I don't know, we had a lot of fun together. So engaging with local children, visits to local museums in the Northeast. And then we asked our visitors, our guests from Jordan, well, what are you going to do with what you've learned in the UK as well? Or also, what can we do in the UK? So they advised our university museums on how to redisplay their so-called Oriental collection, which was taken on board, actually, by the museum staff. And then, as the project after COVID, I went back and did a final part of the two final parts of the project. One was, it was such a joyful moment for me to work with a local school group here. They're based in Amman, and their teachers came out for the day. I thought I was going to have an easy time. The teachers relaxed, and they said, "You get on, you teach them." I thought, "Oh no." So anyway, but in fact they helped. So we had a guided tour of the Amman citadel of the children. We gave them, it's a rather traditional method, but the seller, the NGO, issued them with worksheets to go round the museums, which the children actually enjoyed filling out and finding the secret things in the display. They had a sand pit outside on the citadel where they did an archaeological dig. Again, it's a bit simple and a bit, over simple for my taste. But for them, the children loved it, I have to say. And we gave gift giving, as you well know, is important. And we gave all of the children a specially commissioned book written by a Jordanian children's author on the archaeology of this site here. And the main protagonist in the story is a child. I'll show you. There he is. So this is the child, and he has this dream about the monument, and it all comes alive. So that was really nice. But perhaps less exciting were the guidelines, again, that we published, which we, good practice guidelines and recommendations for anyone working with museums and schools and universities in Jordan. We had the Department of Antiquities as a collaborator on this as well. And then the final part of that project was a lot of sitting around and drinking coffee and tea. I was told that I'd only made it in Jordan if I was invited to drink 3 cups of coffee. So anyway, 3 cups of coffee happened, which was great. So we met people from the ministry, from the National Museum again, and then we presented it all at Petra Museum, which is an amazing new museum, if any of you have been there, to present those guidelines. So a lot of advocacy. Finally, on this part of the story, I just want to tell you about the lessons that we learned along the way. I learned a lot about Jordanian society and Arab culture. We established effective communication between our colleagues to actually work with communities. We certainly avoided the word aid and played the collaboration game instead, but tried to avoid imposing, say, UK, USA standards onto a Jordanian context. And we discovered that the most powerful players of the whole game were the women, Jordanian women, who really moved the project on, through people like Arwa, of course, with whom I collaborated. Okay, this is my last and short final part of the presentation and of my life story so far. So I began working on this Rewriting World Archaeology program with the previous editor of Rob Whitcher, and both Rob and I and a colleague called Sarah Semple from Durham University set up this program of basically trying to help people develop their writing skills, particularly from parts of the world where young up-and-coming scholars have less access to international journals. They're less access to publish in international journals. So our mission then was to help young up-and-coming scholars get published in journals like the one that I now represent, Antiquity. And we were ambitious, so we worked in South Asia, we worked in Africa, and here we are in Ankara today as well. And I did some other work in China as well along these lines. So there we are in Kathmandu and in Nairobi, collaborating, of course, with local mentors all the way along the line in the process as we've done here. Ruth is still working on her paper. It's on my laptop, but she's getting there. She has to get up. She has an amazing life story. I don't have time for it, but she has to. She lives in a village. She works incredibly hard. So then this fed into when I only became editor of Antiquity at the beginning of this year officially, a bit longer behind the scenes. And so as part of my mission as editor of Antiquity, I've tried to actually bring all of this, what I've been talking to you about this evening, the politics of the past, heritage, public archaeology, call it what you like, and of course my passion for archaeology. I've tried to bring it into this very old and distinguished Journal of Archaeology. The problem is it's nearly 100 years old, and I have the duty to celebrate those 100 years of Antiquity Journal, and yet at heart I'm a little bit of a rebel, and so how do I do that? I decided to celebrate the Antiquity centenary in a forward-looking way. We don't need to look back always, particularly on old institutions. I'll do a bit of that, but we need to look forward, and we need to look to early career researchers. You're our future. So that for me is my mission. It's about maintaining the quality of the journal, which is everything, the reputation of the journal, but investing in early career researchers and reaching out to parts of the world that the journal has not reached out to sufficiently in the past, and hearing new voices in the journal. That I'm passionate about, and that's what we're doing. And the trustees are with me on this, I think. So far so good, let's put it that way. So just briefly then, I've written so far 6 editorials, and all of them have been of this kind, of one way or the other. So I've already been accused of being woke, which means essentially politically correct. But that reminds me, remember those friends of my parents? That simply reminds me of those parents that say, justify why you're doing this, justify why you're working in archaeology, justify why, you know, but actually I'm doing it for those anti-woke people. I'm showing you why archaeology matters in the modern world and why it can make a difference. So it is a proper job actually I'm doing now, and I believe in it. Just to give you, so my first editorial, I dedicated it to decolonising the journal. And they didn't sack me after issue 1. So I thought, well, I'll do it again. And that was where the woke word came out, because it was all about challenging Antiquity to be even more global. It's meant to be a review of world archaeology. It's not there yet, but it's trying to get there. So this is a great image for me. It was given by a friend of mine, Professor Wang from the Palace Museum in Beijing, and it represents a collaborative project between Chinese archaeologists, archaeologists from the United Arab Emirates in Ras Al Khaimah, and Australian archaeologists and British archaeologists as well. The story of this pottery is that it was a local ceramic, Julfa ware, medieval ware if you like, made locally at this port site where Chinese porcelain was being imported at the same time. So it's a place of globalization, both in the past and the present, would be my storyline there. But also in that editorial then, as I told you, it was about decolonising, challenging this British archaeological tradition, which is not fit for purpose everywhere in the world, welcoming alternative archaeological histories, editing articles with sensitivities, so if people don't write in English so well, we'll edit them for you or with you. and contributing to training and mentoring. But my question for you tonight, and we'll maybe have a vote on this, every paper that's published in the journal is branded with this logo. You probably maybe recognize the site. It's Stonehenge, a small site in southwest England. But do you want your article to be that branded with that site? And my editorials have the megalithic monument branded on every key section as well. I'm all for getting rid of that. I haven't dared, I have suggested it in print, but I've not dared do it in practice because that probably would get me sacked. But I'm working on it, okay? But should we have a vote? Get rid of it or keep it? What do you think? Get rid of Stonehenge. If you published an article in Antiquity, do you want Stonehenge today? Yes or no? Yes, yes, Stonehenge. Thank you. Okay, it's our world shared heritage. Okay, thank you, thank you. Anyone know? Anyone know? Hands up for no, I don't want Stonehenge on my paper. Okay, so we're keeping Stonehenge. Thank you, thank you. Okay, Stonehenge lives another day. Okay, it doesn't deserve it, but you know. The next editorial that I wrote was, you know, we're always so living life, aren't we? So fast. We're running all the time. Rush, rush, rush. And so my editorial was about fast science and slowing down archaeology. And so these images kind of reflect kind of fast science. A colleague from China who's actually working in our department at the moment, but he's been studying with his PRX machine. It's a Zap machine that tells you a lot about pottery, for example, like this porcelain that's found on a shipwreck. And you get this outreach. A lot of public archaeology events, they're about telling the wonderful stories of science, how great science is, the power of science to peer down your microscope, and in this case, actually understand not only past environment through the seeds and remains you find, but also the story of climate change, actually. So you can make the story of science relevant to the present day, the story of past archaeological science relevant to the present day. Well, sorry, I'm going to be critical. I think we need to slow down. So a colleague, a friend of mine, Christian Christensen, wrote this really influential article called The Third Science Revolution in archaeology, where he basically characterizes scientific archaeology back then and now in terms of the availability of huge amounts of data, quantitative modeling, as some of you are doing, studies of ancient DNA and isotopes and so on, making a return to these great grand narratives of archaeology. We can now tell stories of migration, mobility. We can tell stories of diet. We can talk, you know, we can get back and tell stories of, you know, race even, but slightly in different terminologies and so on. So we can tell all these grand narratives. But, you know, I'm for the slow movement, or I should be. I'm as fast perhaps as anyone, but, you know, but we should slow down. I really feel that. The slow movement means it also means slowing down. We're stuck in this capitalist pace of productivity, exploitation, blah, blah, blah. It's not good and it's not sustainable. Slow travel, etc. Slow science. Well, there is a manifesto published online. It's not great, to be honest, because it argues scientists must take their time to think, to read, to digest, also to misunderstand and fail. Have we got time for that? Sadly, probably not. But I like the ideal to slow down and make mistakes and slow thinking. We need good funding to do that, don't we? Otherwise, we lose our jobs, unfortunately, in this fast science. You know, you're out of the door unless you're into fast. So, but it does at least, I think, raising this debate, it has implications for our lives. And again, I hope we'll talk about this after. How we lead our lives. Some of us have families, some of us want to sleep. And also, for my purposes, it has significance for the quality of archaeological science. Is it cooked enough? Should the science be a bit more slow cooked than fast cooked? Another theme that's really close to my heart, sorry, I'm going on, but I'll speed even more, are the languages of archaeology. And this combines with politics, really. The Rosetta Stone is a classic example, both of three languages written on a monumental stone, but also the appropriation of that stone with the English language applied to the sides of that stone. And I don't know if you've seen that on the sides of the stone before, on this replica, which says captured in Egypt, that's from the French actually, by the British Army in 1801 and presented to the British Museum by King George III. But that's a fourth language imposed onto an ancient Egyptian monument. So language then is political. Sorry, anti-woke people. Sorry, my parents' friends. It is political. And it's political today in the languages we use in archaeology around the world. We live in an increasingly Anglophone scientific universe. But should English actually be this dominant language of world archaeology? I think it gives privilege to native English speakers and writers, and I'm uncomfortable with that. And like on this workshop that we've been doing, I still worry about it, although they argue back and said, no, English is the language of science. But I think we need to value how diverse and complex linguistically archaeology is, and that we can benefit from languages, from words at least, from other languages. My best example is the chaîne opératoire. You translate chaîne opératoire into English, the operational chain. It doesn't work, does it? Thank you, French. We'll keep it. But we'll also take other languages and take words, incorporate them into our vocabulary, our energy, and benefit. This is more difficult. It was a tough, really tough one to write and think about and research. Archaeology in wartime today. These two examples say a lot, I think, but I don't really have time to go into them. This is a Gaza mosque. It was actually destroyed first by the British. The Supreme Muslim Council then rebuilt it, and then, as you probably know, it was destroyed most recently by Israeli bombardment. Ironically, it has Jewish ritual objects represented in the monument itself, along with a whole load of other religions from Philistine, Roman, Byzantine, and Catholic. So it's a multi-religious site. This museum is slowly being restored. Again, it was in the process of being restored. Islamic State came and on video vandalized it, including this. I think it's a grenade created that hole in the museum floor. Here's the museum's director speaking to a group of school children. The project has mainly involved architects funded internationally coming in and, in a sense, imposing their global model of what the museum should be like and be developed. Thankfully, more recently, the next phase of the project is asking the local community, the citizens of Mosul, about how they want their cultural heritage and Iraq's wonderful, rich archaeology, how they want it to be presented in their city. So the Brits are told and taught not to talk about the war, but I am. There are consequences then of modern armed conflict for our archaeology that we practice today. I don't think we can delegate responsibility and say, oh, we just give it to those heritage experts. It's they're the experts, leave it to them. We don't need to talk about politics or the war. We do. I'm not sure that just these Western NGOs and, various big international funded programs are always the way forward in terms of post-conflict development and regeneration. There are also implications for big organizations like the World Archaeological Congress, which kind of came into being through apartheid and politics, and the EAA, the European Association of Archaeologists, which is now completely split in the middle over whether to include or not Israeli archaeologists and to silence people who were protesting about the destructions in Gaza. But also, I think ultimately the lesson for me on that about talking about the war and heritage is about caring. Actually, at the end of the day, it's not about archaeology. It's about people. It's about local people. And if I had a choice, it's always the local people, and you let the archaeology come secondary, although the two are, of course, intertwined. Okay, my final theme is, and the one that I've written most recently, is about climate, environmental change, actually, and archaeology at a time of global environmental crisis. Thankfully, due to climate change, thank you, climate change, it gives us shipwrecks like this. Revealed on the coast of Scotland, this was firstly, a Royal Navy ship that was used in colonial times to fight in wars off the coast of Canada to protect the colonial interests of the British. It was then repurposed as a whaling ship in the Arctic seas, so that you could hunt whales that then fueled the Industrial Revolution, because you need whale oil to turn all that machinery in the British Industrial Revolution. The British Industrial Revolution then started or contributed significantly to global environmental climate change. So it's a bit of I hope that, it's an ironic story again. This one is as well. So it's a sunken World War II battleship, and now protected in a US nature marine sanctuary. And you can see all those live animals, lovely, lovely. If I turn that image upside down, all those animals would be lying dead, including those lovely shark. All of those animals would be lying dead because there's an environmental crisis from heritage lying at the bottom of seas, particularly from military boats, because they're just waiting to leak out once their metal structures corrode, waiting to leak out all those chemicals, all those munitions. They are a ticking time bomb of environmental disaster. So, there are challenges with environmental, archaeological heritage and saving it all or protecting, and what you do with it. So archaeology saves the world is the motif for many people. There is an article called Archaeology Saves the World. I don't believe that, okay? I don't buy that storyline, sorry. And I am proud to call myself an archaeologist now, but I'm not a saver of the world. We're not superheroes, that's just silly at an age of global environmental catastrophe. So the question is, can archaeologists make a difference? I think we can. We can, in our own ways, reduce our environmental footprint by doing recycling, for example. We can at work and at home. But also there are some contributions of environmental archaeologists that are valuable in informing longer term environmental models of climate change, for example. But those have to be hard data, and the archaeologists can't overstate it, because it is a bit exaggerated, the rhetoric, even the archaeological scientists' contribution to understanding climate change and also actually changing policy. Archaeologists are just one small group. We have to collaborate then. But I think, coming back to one of the themes of my story throughout this evening, is we need to collaborate. And this is where I think we get the best win, is working with local communities to work on local climate change projects, local preservation projects, to make a difference. So let's not try and save the world. Let's just work with local communities. My last slide then. So here then, I'm sort of playing around with what direction we're going, whether we're going back to the past to save the future or so on. I've tried to present you some old challenges of who owns the past, and some new challenges like who saves the world. I've presented the archaeology that I would like to promote to you is most certainly scientifically rigorous, of the highest quality. I'm not denying that. But I am also presenting archaeology to you, promoting it to you as self-critical, as politically aware, as socially active, and also just sometimes creative. I mean, look at this amazing stuff we get to work with in Ankara. So be creative here in Ankara. I'm sure you are. Archaeologists, I think, can make a real difference. And I've really, some of the most moving times I've been in my career as an archaeologist has been working locally with communities and those school children and the local people or in various places. We can make a difference. And so for me, actually, that life story has moved to one of escaping from the present to actually now embracing the present. You know, it's to being more of an anthropologist almost, I suppose, than an archaeologist, embracing the complexities of the modern world we live in. So I don't need to escape, although when I retire, I am most certainly going to escape. So thank you so much for your patience and for your hospitality. Okay.
Thank you so much, Robin. This was amazing. And do we have any questions from the room? And Elif.
Thank you so much. I mean, there's a lot of stuff to think about. And this all made me think about one more aspect that we're dealing with. And I'd like to hear what you think about the introduction of artificial intelligence into our world.
Yes, yes. So I could give you so many answers. I'm still struggling with it, but I'm not anti it at all. Well, I am kind of, but in the romantic in me is anti it. But no, I think we have to embrace it as a tool. Like, it's just a tool. It gets things wrong, like any tools. That's the way I understand it. At least it's a tool for archaeologists. Not, you know, it can be a dangerous tool. It can be a problematic tool. But I trying to think of some examples. So. I'm also a trustee of a commercial archaeology company called Wessex Archaeology. And they have someone from Meta on their board, actually, who is just AI obsessed. And he says AI is going to change the world, save the world. And for them, for example, just doing their basic accounting, it's a really complex flow of money through the organization. So by allowing AI in a controlled manner, not freeing all the data to everyone to say, but in a controlled manner, using AI to look at the finances of that archaeological organization. They can have a snapshot at any moment how much money they've got in the bank or that's flowing. So that's just one example. But also in terms of, I was speaking to a colleague the other day in terms of teaching and learning. And so in the classroom, he said, well, let's try AI, actually, let's experiment. And so it was a teaching resource in that they found, yes, it kind of gave some useful answer to the scientific problem they were trying to solve on ceramics, sort of thin sections or whatever. But it also didn't give a great answer. And what I thought was so valuable there is that the students saw that it didn't give the greatest answer, actually. So I think we need to learn the strengths and the weaknesses of AI. What do you think?
No, I mean, no, I agree, and I think the key is a controlled data set with which you can work. Otherwise, I mean, you need data that you can get at answers. Otherwise, it just can go insane.
Yeah.
But it seems like we're going to be dealing with it more and more in the future.
Yes, yes. And we don't want it just to give us pleasing answers. Like me, it has to give us a heart. It's designed to only please. I mean, there's some people working here. I see a friend there who's working with AI on stamp seal images and so on. And it's a challenge. And we've been working on this workshop with it. So Tolga there, and he's at the forefront. But it's difficult, as you've discovered, Tolga. Do you want to say any more about it, Tolga?
Thank you. Actually, we will see every industry needs to attention to this technology because every industry works with the different data and it has different perspective, different needs. So we will see in the future maybe, but it's very beginning of the era, I think.
And so, yeah, so for you, it's been a problem of putting quality in, and the data aren't of high enough quality yet to actually get
Yes.
really good results out of the other end.
Yes, the system works with the data. The fuel is data in here, so we need very clear and very useful data. So it works. Maybe we collect the trustable data, so it works good actually.
Once we've seen the mistakes it made, though, didn't we? We had to see how it worked not so good as well. But it does. We've got some good. You've got some good results now.
Yes, yes.
Brilliant. Michele would agree. No, he's still critical.
I mean, it is a tool, right? And one has to understand what works well with that tool and what doesn't. So the hype, I mean, in archaeology, I mean, I'm not talking about how AI can be employed in other contexts. In archaeology, the more that tool is understood, the better it can be used.
Yes, yes, yeah. But it's here to stay, so we have to deal with it. I'm not going to deal with it in an editorial, that's for sure. It's a nightmare subject.
But can I comment? Actually,
Yeah.
thank you. It was very inspiring, and not only for the breadth of what you've done, but also because you put yourself totally into it, and this is inspiring for me. You know, as a person and as an archaeologist, in bringing all this passion and all of this stuff that is very you. I mean, I could see Robin all over. So thank you. And something maybe a bit related to it. I mean, you say I still do not know what a wow moment for, you know, like what is wowing people in archaeology. But I think that you did give a lot of hints, right? And I feel what people that are not archaeologists are wowed about is not much, you know, the information behind it, but it's really the senses, what they feel about, what the memory is connected to. So it's something very non-scientific in a sense.
Yes, absolutely, and we need to understand that. Yeah, absolutely. But thank you, Michele, for your kind words. There is me there, and I don't care anymore.
Kevin.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. I have many, many thoughts. The theme that kept circling back around was to trust and empower local communities. And I like that. But there was a second kind of community going on there that I wondered if I could ask you to talk about, which is you going to Jordan or to China, or me being here for that matter, or decolonizing antiquity, which seems to be also about cultivating translocal, non-local, global communities, which might have different interests and different needs. And there might be a tension there. And I just wondered if you see a tension there. And how you think of resolving.
So I can't resolve these tensions necessarily. I think we need to recognize these tensions. So in China, for example, we all know China is developing incredibly rapidly, including in the sciences, including in archaeology. The number of publication submissions we get into antiquity, the second largest group after US and European submissions, are from China. And the quality of their work is incredibly high. So there is a real ambition in China. And there I think I can meet that ambition to a certain extent and understand it and collaborate. But there are other aspects of that Chinese commitment and sort of political agenda to redevelopment, this sort of what's it called, Belt and Sea? Is it called a Belt and, I don't know, it's a political agenda basically to recreate trade networks from both the Silk Route and the maritime Silk Route. So it's a more commercial agenda and a political agenda that, of course, you know, I don't feel comfortable with, and I would like to be more critical. But I know that if I can't really discuss that in China. So I am compromised in a sense when I go to China and I have these wonderful conversations with people. And it's difficult, and I have tensions when I come back to the UK, and I had tensions with my colleagues in Durham when they said, why are you going to China all the time? You know, we can partner with other places. So it was a difficult, or not all of my colleagues said that, but a few. So there are these difficult tensions. I feel for my part, it's about trying to understand what goes on in people's minds, the people that I'm speaking with, and spending time with them to understand their families, their cultures. And it's what I tried to do in Jordan, and it's what I've tried to do in places like China, is just understand why people are involved in archaeology, what's good for them as well, and try and work with their needs, but not to the detriment of others. I know I'm a bit romantic on that. It's not a perfect answer. I'd love the world to be a happy place, but it isn't. But you know, it's trying to cause no harm in the process. I suppose that's my principle, my operating principle. But it is a bit naive.
Do we have any
Thanks.
other questions from? And the online audience is very silent, I think.
Well, I've been on rather long, so their eyes are closed by now.
Well, unless there are any online questions, we can actually invite the guests in the room to have a glass of something, glass of wine or whatever with us, and you can continue asking your questions to Robin. And please join me in saying thank you and for this wonderful, wonderful lecture.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Brilliant. Thanks a lot.